I want you to imagine for a moment that you've got a decision to make that's going to cost you at least $1 million to implement and which may cost you millions more. Maybe even your credibility or your job if you make the wrong decision. Chances are good you're going to want to take some time to research that decision. And chances are also good that you're going to find that the information that you need isn't just something you can go out and find on Google or Wikipedia or anything like that. If you're lucky, you might be able to find some talks or some papers or some case studies that other people have used to face a similar problem, and you'll find out how they made a decision that they were happy with. And that process is called secondary research. But what's more likely is that you're going to instead realize that the information that you need is in someone else's head. And to get that information, you're probably going to need to conduct some primary research. But here's the problem that you're going to face. There's no end to opinions in this world, and just about anybody will share their opinion with you if you ask them in terms that they can understand. The problem is that many people respond to questions in terms of telling you how they feel rather than in telling you what real knowledge they have and what they know. We humans are social creatures at heart. We're generally wired to try to be helpful when others ask us for something. Unfortunately, this often causes us to express opinions that aren't actually what we think and feel. And because that's a problem that greatly reduces the credibility of asking people their opinions about things, several fields of what we call the social sciences, things like psychology, sociology, anthropology, and the humanities, have developed tools to help collect opinions from individuals and build them into data that can be analyzed and validated. If you're the person who's supposed to take those opinions and use them to help support that $1 million decision you're about to make, you're probably going to want to ensure that you're using some of those tools to collect your data. And I've got good news for you. That tool chest is exactly what we're going to be covering in this course, and they're part of the field of marketing research. But before I hand you those tools and teach you how to use them through what we call applied research, we're first going to need to spend a little bit of time figuring out what those tools are designed for in the first place. And right off the bat, I think it's good for us to begin with the big question, one that ought to keep us all awake at night and nag away at us every time we think we've identified some conclusive finding in the data we've collected. Because, you see, there's a fine line between the actual science of good research and the far easier and more common approach of what we're going to call pseudoscience. The unfortunate truth is a desire for speed and insights in the field of marketing research often leads to approaches that don't have much scientific rigor behind them. And the field that we're going to cover in this class, qualitative research, is not only rife with pseudoscience, but it's also considered less credible because of it. So before we make that $1 million decision that may have a huge impact on our career, we need to ask, is marketing research really trustworthy? And how do we know it can be trusted to provide good information that we can trust to support those decisions that we need to make? Well, now's probably a great time to introduce myself. My name is Sean Jordan, and I am the Research Director and Managing Partner at the Research and Planning Group, a full-service marketing research firm that's based in St. Louis, Missouri, that's been around for over 3 decades, in which conducts a lot of qualitative and quantitative research for clients all over the world. But in addition to that, I'm also a graduate of the SIUE MMR program. I actually interned at the Research and Planning Group during my time as an MMR student, and now I'm still here doing this kind of work. And I'm going to be your instructor for the next several weeks, teaching you all about qualitative research. And a few other things you should know about me. I'm a former professional comic book writer and editor. I also was an award-winning video game store manager and a professional video game reviewer at one point in my life. I'm also a former and award-winning fast food manager, so I got to learn about the world of services from the ground up, the front lines, from watching service interactions going on right in front of me. And most importantly, I love qualitative research, and I really want you to love it too. I'm going to be clear about my intentions here. I want you to love this class, and I want you to love qualitative research when you walk out of here in a couple of months. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure both of those things happen. A big part of that is going to be our in-class work, but I've also put a lot of time and effort into these lecture videos to make sure that you can refer back to them later on in your career if you ever have a need to review this information. Now, the first series of lectures is going to focus on what qualitative research is and why you should be excited about it. Our next several series are going to focus on 4 specific methods of qualitative research: observational, in-depth interviewing, ethnographic research, and focus groups. We're going to close out this course by talking about how to analyze qualitative data, how to report on it, how to present it, and then what the future of qualitative research has in store for us all. Even if you don't love qual when we're done, I'm positive that you're going to have a strong appreciation for it. And what's more, I think you're going to find that you're going to be more able to detect when qualitative research has been conducted in a manner that can be trusted and when it's been conducted in a manner that cannot. So with all that said, let's begin. So let's go back to my original question. How do we know that we can trust marketing research, any marketing research in general? Or, stated a little bit differently, how do we know that marketing research is science and not pseudoscience? This is actually a very important question for us to ask because marketing research is what we call an applied science. It uses methods that are derived from other fields and then applies them to specific real-world contexts, often with quite a bit less rigor than those other fields might require. So before we begin learning about qualitative research, I think it's important for us to take 2 steps back and think critically about marketing research in general. Because the reality is, there's an awful lot of what is done in practice that isn't actually science. And our field is a little too accepting of junky data, and it's not nearly focused enough on the deeper principles of scientific inquiry. So let's start by talking about science, real science, and how it works. And the easiest way to talk about science is by discussing the scientific method. And before you groan, let me remind you, every tool we use in the field of marketing research is derived from some field of science, and every scientific field is built upon this foundation. It's not only important for us to keep the scientific method in mind, but it's absolutely vital that we treat it as our prime directive, or else all of our hard work becomes pseudoscience. And to me, having your work labeled pseudoscience is a pretty big insult. Pseudoscience means phony. Pseudoscience means charlatans. Pseudoscience means Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, and ghost hunters, and fake cures for serious medical conditions, and multi-level marketing schemes. Pseudoscience means appropriating scientific tools and language and then misusing them so badly that you invent a reality that only suckers can believe in. I don't want to practice pseudoscience. I don't want any of you to practice pseudoscience. I want us all to develop research that holds up and which uses the tools of scientific inquiry properly. I want us all to be seekers of truth. And I want us all to be able to stand up in front of anybody who challenges the hard work we've done and to be able to defend it. But to do that, you need to have a firm understanding of the scientific method. And I'm going to presume that you've been taught this method time and time again in every level of your education. But I'm also going to presume that you're going into the field of business or marketing research because you're not planning to be a scientist per se. So here's a quick refresher. So the overarching idea of the scientific method is very simple. The truth is difficult to nail down, so here's a tried and true way to get as close to it as possible. We can approach the scientific method using the following 4 steps. So first, we have identifying a research problem. We need to find a question that needs to be answered, and then before we try to answer that question, we need to review the available data and see if we can find an answer in what's already been collected. And if not, then we go out and try to collect more data in order to address that question. Next, we're going to form a hypothesis. We're going to design some sort of test or some sort of data collection exercise, and we're going to try to predict the outcome of what we're going to get out of that process. Then we're actually going to begin the process of gathering data. So when we identified our research problem, we might have gathered some available data from secondary sources, but generally we're going to have to go and collect primary data, where we're going to have to go out to the field and collect one of 2 styles of data. One is going to be something that comes from experimental methods, where we're trying to establish a cause and effect. The other, which we use much more commonly in marketing research, is going to come from observational methods, where we are collecting data that come from a variety of different types of sources, whether they're self-reported by the participants in studies or whether they're things that we observe as researchers, and we're going to compile those into a source that we can look at. Then finally, once we have done all of those other things, then we're going to examine our data and start to try to draw some conclusions. We're going to determine whether our data confirm our hypothesis or fail to support it. If our hypothesis passes, we're going to repeat under the same conditions and try to validate. And if our hypothesis fails, we're going to reject or modify what we came up with and then retry and try to figure out a little bit closer to what we were hoping to find out if we can find a hypothesis that disagrees with what we thought we knew before. But with all that said, do you see a problem with this method? The scientific method is based on a fairly rigid framework that's not necessarily well suited to solving marketing problems or broader opinion research. We are going to need a modified framework for methods of scientific inquiry, and guess what? We're going to cover that in our next lecture.